Immigration consistently ranks as one of the top issues of the 2024 election. Last year, red states had enough of people pouring through the border. Texas Governor Greg Abbott engineered a plan to get border states to ship migrants to blue cities, such as New York City, Chicago, and Washington, D.C. What was at first seen as a political stunt quickly became a wake-up call. Now today, the one thing both sides can agree on is that the border is a mess and something does need to be done about it. While policymakers duke out what can be done to fix the situation, people like whistleblower Tara Lee Rodas, who worked on the ground, had urgent concerns. She testified before Congress this week to outline how the policy mess has translated into an abuse and trafficking situation for children.
One key area of concern for Rodas was how gangs such as MS-13 were sponsoring kids and then launching them into a maze of abuse and horror. She says when she reported what she saw, her badge was taken. Health and Human Services whistleblower Tara Rodas is here now to shine a light on this situation. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you shining a light on what we now know is government-sponsored, taxpayer-funded child trafficking.
Yeah, when I was watching your testimony, you talked about how the things you saw had fundamentally changed your life. What are the horrors that Americans need to know about?
Well, I think the fact that the United States government has used billions of taxpayer dollars to put children in what is modern day slavery is appalling. It is shameful. And people just don't realize that the children who show up at the border alone, these children are here alone. They're very vulnerable. And then we're shipping them to criminals, traffickers, and members of transnational criminal organizations like MS-13 and 18th Street Gang and other cartels. Honestly, had I not seen it myself, I could not believe that the U.S. government has become the middleman in a child trafficking operation.
So when you say child trafficking operation, you're talking about what happens to them when they actually get here to the U.S. or the process of coming over the border?
Yeah, the process of them coming over the border. The children were telling us they were being recruited by bad actors here in the United States saying, hey, if you come here, instead of making $2.50 a day in Guatemala, this was a real case that I worked on. Instead of $2.50 a day, I'm going to pay you $6 an hour. Now you have to stay with me until your debts are paid. So the children we knew were in debt bondage. They were telling us that, and they were not able to leave the sponsor until the debts were paid.
What role does the immigration crisis play in cartels being able to move these children across the border?
That is a very great question that should be asked of the Secretary of DHS and HHS, because right now they're not information sharing at all. In the past, HHS would share the sponsor name with DHS, so they could actually look to see if these people were criminals. Now that information sharing has been completely cut off. So that's one major thing that has contributed to this crisis. The other thing is HHS, because they're not investigative, they're not law enforcement. They have no idea how to properly train people to look for trafficking concerns. So they have no business taking children into their care, releasing them into the United States to people they've never seen, to homes they've never visited. We would never allow this sort of horrific treatment to happen to children here in the United States. And we need to stand up. This is not a political issue. We need to stand up for these children. They have nobody. They have nobody once they get here. And many of them cannot even speak Spanish. So those who come here speaking Spanish have some help, right? We have some law enforcement and people who can speak Spanish, but many of these children speak Mayan dialects. They're very indigenous Mayan dialects like Quiche, Quechua, and Hmong. They have no way to ask for help. They become victims captive victims of their sponsors.
Where
It's
is
evil.
Where is Child Protective Services on this? Because that is an organization, it differs in the many states, goes by many different names, is often a very robust organization that does check in on a number of families in difficult situations with children and children in foster care and that kind of thing. Why are they not shining a light on this?
Because HHS is holding secret the names and locations of the sponsors of the children. It's unthinkable that there are attorney generals, like my attorney general in the state of Virginia, Jason Miyares, has been asking repeatedly. There are children. We have 22 children missing in a small town here in Virginia of Culpeper, and HHS refuses to give the critical information to the states that could save the children. HHS is holding this data hostage. They won't allow anyone to see it because they know once law enforcement and the states can see what's happened to the children, that there is no rug big enough in the universe to put this under.
When HHS let you go, what was their rationale and how did they justify that to you?
So what they claimed as cover for action. So I reported the first case of MS-13, of a known affiliated MS-13 actor on our site who was attempting to sponsor 2 young teenagers, 13 years old, one from our site and one from the Fort Bliss emergency intake site. As soon as I reported that case, that's when everything changed. I went from being, they appointed me to the deputy of the director for our case management team. I was highly trusted, highly valued in all of the top executive meetings. They valued my input. They brought me in on meetings with the Executive Office of the President, the U.S. Digital Service. But the moment I reported that MS-13 case, it took them less than 3 weeks to swiftly accuse me of wrongdoing completely falsely, and then threaten me with investigation and walked me off the site with security. So HHS ORR, their federal field specialist, which was one of the highest ranking HHS people on the site, along with security, had me clean out my belongings from my workspace in front of my peers midday. We call that the perp walk.
Yeah.
The walk of shame. They try to shame you in front of your peers while simultaneously scaring anybody else from coming forward. So they learned I made protected disclosures to Department of Justice, OIG, and HHS, OIG, and they outed me in front of everybody and then, falsely accused me of wrongdoing. It's absurd. They were trying to hide that they were knowingly, because they were aware. I advised them, this sponsor has known MS-13 gang affiliation, and they didn't want it to get out. So they decided to try to get rid of me instead.
It's incredible because you'd think the political upside of actually doing something about an MS-13 contact would be good for someone on either side of the political aisle. That the concerns about illegal immigration, about trafficking of children, does not need to be political at all, or people on both sides of the aisle obviously are against that and want something done about it. So you'd think a more muscular response to this problem could be a win, but here you are calling attention to it, and your former bosses in the Biden administration saying, no, keep this quiet.
Yeah, it really is astounding because I volunteered to support the Biden administration with this crisis at the border. As a Spanish speaker, my husband is from El Salvador. I've been to Guatemala, Mexico, El Salvador, and I thought I can be there to help the children. And once we realized they were trafficking them in June of 2021 is when we started reporting that, I begged, I appealed. I said, look, no one is going to blame you if you sound the alarms. I said, just sound the alarms and say, look, bad actors have figured out ways to exploit our program. They are using name fraud, address fraud. They are sponsoring from one apartment. There's like 3 sponsors in one apartment. We have children, like 40 children going to an apartment building. I said, look, if you sound the alarm, you can be the hero. Be the hero. Call in the big guns, call FBI, call Homeland Security Investigations, please. I said, no one is going to blame you for sounding the alarm. And they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't do it.
It's so sad. It feels like there's a willful turning of a blind eye to this. And there's not, like you said, people who can really stand up and vouch for these children because they're in a country that they're unfamiliar from. What would your message be to HHS moving forward?
Release the data so the children can be found. HHS has admitted over 85,000 children they've lost contact with. That's what they admit. That's what they admit. They're losing track of 1/3 of every child that crosses the border. That's totally unacceptable. That is an F. These are children. Children. Release the information so the children can be found. My appeal is find the children, rescue the children. It's unthinkable that there are children right now who need help. They're in crisis and no one is coming for them because HHS is holding the information hostage.
Tara Rodas, thank you so much for coming on Rising to tell us more about the situation. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for shining a light. Thank you.